Hello and welcome to the Integrated Rehab and Performance Podcast. My name is Dr. Nick Curtis and I'm running the show here at the Integrated Rehab and Performance Center in Brentwood, Tennessee. Today we are talking about mobility, stability, and strength needed for the downswing for golfers. Now, if you haven't seen or listened to last week's article or podcast, go ahead and do that. That is talking about the backswing, how important it is to have good mobility and access and motor control to stabilize those joints and create mobility around those joints for that backswing. It's vital. Today we're talking about the downswing. More specifically, we're going to talk about my biggest finding with golfers, the biggest limiter, and that is that lead side hip. And what tends to be with these cases is the loss of internal rotation, as well as motor control or an understanding of how to use that hip to create power, but also how to, even if we had mobility, how do we shift into that hip and use it under good golf mechanics so that we're putting that hip and pelvis in the right position on that downswing. So today we're really going to focus on that front hip, but we're also going to talk a little bit about mobility and then a bunch on creating stability, strength, and control over that lead side hip. And we're even going to talk about a drill that we can start to use to translate a little bit into getting some golf mechanics back into that hip and a kind of a feel for how we use that hip in the backswing, that downswing. So let's check it out. Okay, so of course, mobility is essential for reproducible and efficient downswings. We need to have access to right side external rotation, or for already back side external rotation, front side internal rotation of our hips. Our feet need to be able to supinate and pronate. Think about cupping your foot in and up towards you, or pushing down and away, that being supination, and then pronation being the latter. We need we need shoulders to be able to internally and externally rotate. We definitely need thoracic spine, rotation, speed, and then the pelvis needs to be able to control in the sagittal plane. So that means that anterior, forward tilting, and backwards tilting, as well as rotation through that pelvis, right? And then the timing, of course, is super important with that. And that lead side hip needs that internal rotation and needs to play well with that pelvis. So the pelvis needs to be able to stay in a neutral position. It needs to be able to tilt forward and tilt backwards when it needs to. And then it needs to be able to have that pelvis rotate on top of it. And then we need to be strong through our knee and our foot, and our ankle needs to be stable enough that we can, again, rotate the pelvis on that stable leg. So let's talk a little bit about, again, I'll show you this video from the last article if you saw it, or podcast if you watched it. This video quickly here that will demonstrate what I mean when I say internal rotation here or there. Again, this is for the backswing and the downswing. Okay, so what do we need from the body in the backswing and the downswing? Well, from the joints, we need a lot. Just about every joint is involved in some way, but we're going to go over the key joints here. So, first thing, with the backswing, we need from this backside hip, whether you're a lefty or a righty, this backside hip, what we need to be able to do is internally rotate this hip. What you can imagine is happening there is that this pelvis is moving on a stable hip, tibia, and foot, right? So if this is staying straight, what's happening is this pelvis is moving inward on top of this. You can imagine this thigh is moving inward or rotating inward. Now, if the pelvis is stable and I do this, this is internal rotation of the hip. Same thing, if I stabilize this and I move the hip or the pelvis on the hip, same thing's happening at that joint. It doesn't know the difference. That's hip internal rotation. We're also getting pelvis right rotation, right, to internally rotate that hip. We're getting thorax right rotation. We're also getting some extension here at that mid-back, especially that thoracic spine, where we need to be able to extend it a little bit. We're getting a little bit of trunk flexion here from our starting position, and then our backswing there. And then same thing here with the arms. We're having thorax right rotation as well as lead side arm internal rotation. So we need this arm to be able to come across our body and internally rotate. When it comes to this backside arm, very important, is we need this backside arm to be able to externally rotate. So if we imagine this position here, we need the arm to be able to do that. Okay, so what that looks like here is this position. Again, especially if we're trying to keep that elbow in and tucked in for our swing plane mechanics there, it is vital that we have good external rotation of this backside arm. Otherwise, we can't quite get there. We get this elbow popping up, flying out, and that leads to all sorts of swing characteristics that we don't necessarily want, right? So all of these things need to work together to get us into that top of that backswing position comfortably, that we can do it repetitively. We don't have to think so hard to do it. And then we can work on other things like our timing and certain swing characteristics that are popping up. We can work on those without having mobility be an issue. So again, right hip or backside hip internal rotation. We need
external rotation of this front side hip. So what's happening there, again, stable foot and hip, pelvis is rotating this way. You can think this hip's almost like it's rotating out like this, but instead this is staying where it is and this pelvis is moving on top of it. That hip doesn't know the difference. All it knows is that it's opening up like that. Okay, so again, front side, lead side, shoulder, internal rotation, external rotation of the hip, back side, shoulder. That's what this is, external rotation here, but internal rotation of this inside hip. This internal rotation tends to be an issue for a lot of golfers, and then this backside external rotation tends to be an issue as well. That's the main things we need from the backswing. Again, trunk rotation, pelvis rotation to the right, external rotation, hip internal rotation. External rotation here, internal rotation here. When we come into the downswing, what this looks like here through impact is as we're shifting our weight forward, we need this side to have internal rotation now. Again, before we needed external rotation. Now, with a stable leg, we need this pelvis to be able to come through and rotate, creating internal rotation here at this hip joint. Hip doesn't know the difference. All it knows is that it needs to be good, strong, and mobile enough to do left side, in this case, internal rotation. If we can't do that, all sorts of things start to happen where we try to avoid that internal rotation. Maybe we extend out, we push out like this. Any host of things can happen. If our body doesn't like being comfortable here, we can't get that hip back. We don't have enough internal rotation here, or if it's painful, right? Opposite here, we need external rotation. We need this foot to stay stable. We need this glute to be able to create external rotation to rotate this pelvis on this stable leg, creating external rotation here. Thorax trunk, obviously now we're doing, in this case, left rotation or lead side rotation. Pelvis is rotating towards that lead side. And then we have through here, backside shoulder, internal rotation, front side shoulder, external rotation, right? External rotation through here. If we're lacking any of this, again, who knows what could happen to that club face if we don't have adequate right shoulder or back shoulder internal rotation or external rotation through here. What's it doing to our follow through? Okay, so lots of things important. Mobility, very important for the golf swing. Just about every joint is involved. Somehow, these are some of the key players and what their mobility requirements are for the backswing as well as the downswing.
Now let's dive into the role of joint stability and strength for that downswing. Again, we're going to focus on that lead side hip. If once we've gained mobility back into that lead side hip, internal rotation, we do some hands-on techniques, some soft tissue techniques if needed, chiropractic extremity adjusting as needed, adjusting the pelvis, the hip, the knee, ankle. Once we built that mobility back in, we also do exercises and drills, even some breathing drills to get that pelvis, to help bring that pelvis back into neutral so that we can operate off that neutral playing ground. Very important for clearing up range of motion in that hip. All sorts of these things. Once we get through those earlier techniques and exercises, then we get into the more intense exercise where we'll really load that hip, and that's a great way to challenge that internal rotation under load, but also putting you in positions where we're emphasizing the need for internal rotation. That's how we build some more internal rotation, but we also build some stability around that mobility too. After we do that, we need to, and we can use these drills as well in these exercises to create strength around that hip. And then last, we want to build power and speed and mechanics back into that, so timing. So we can time that up with the motion of the pelvis and the trunk, and then shift into that hip, but not over-shifting by using that mobility and then using the strength to stop it, decelerate it, and then turn that into some rotation. So I've listed out a couple drills here and exercises that walk us through that process a little bit. Again, the stability of that hip, what that does, that allows us to shift into that side without sliding past neutral, right? Sliding past over that foot, which in case throws off all of our timing. And it, again, it's a swing characteristics that we don't necessarily want to see. So what we need to do is teach the golfer, build back some mobility into that hip, build back strength, but then learn how to use the mobility and that stability to limit us when we need to limit it, and then turn that range of motion back into a stable process for the pelvis to move on that hip, and we're not sliding or shifting past it. So that's again, it's a strength thing, but then it also becomes a motor control and understanding thing, a sensation thing. Getting these players to get back into their hips, that's how we kind of word it, get into your hips a little bit. It's a sensation thing. So it's not just about doing an exercise or a drill on the ground to create some mobility in that hip or stretch it and then go and start golfing. Is we can actually influence your ability to sense that new mobility, to feel it, and then teach you in which way to use it. So here are 3 drills, going first through creating a little bit of strength, but also emphasizing the need for internal rotation of that hip so that we're building more mobility into that hip, but at the same time under control. So we're using muscles to control it. Then the second one, where we're getting more speed and forces involved, where we're using those hips again to decelerate and start accelerating weight, feeling what it's like to shift into a hip and then out of it. Very important for the golf swing. And then the last one, which we're going to focus on, keeping our pelvis in a position that mimics kind of a golf swing as we shift weight and then create power and vertical force through that foot and hip, and what that feels like to turn that lateral or side-to-side force into a vertical force to create power. And you should feel that lateral or outside of that hip working really hard, stabilizing hard through there as we demand a little bit of mobility from it, but at the same time we're not letting ourselves get loose with that motion to create bad habits or swing characteristics. So again, it's using mobility, but then also creating that stability right at the end when we need it to make sure that we're not going too far, or using other joints to pull the momentum or keep that momentum moving forward in the wrong direction, right? So we use the hip to stop that and turn it into something else, like in this case, a vertical force and a rotational force as opposed to that side force. And that is that 1 foot wall supported med ball slam that you'll see at the end. So 3 exercises here for you to try. Let's take a look at them.
Okay, this is the rack supported bent over split squat. So we can use a rack here just to help with some balance and support. We're going to have in this case, we'll pick my left leg forward. Now from here, I want my trunk to match the angle of my back leg. And we're going to maintain that angle the entire time. I can use a kettlebell or a dumbbell here to load on the side opposite my front leg. So opposite that front leg. From here, a little support. I'm going to squat straight down, stand back up, never losing this trunk forward flexion here. So again, we should be stable, have a good braced core as we do this, but we're never extending back up out of it. So staying forward, keeping the weight forward on this front foot, squatting straight down, owning that position, maintaining this forward trunk angle, and then back up. Always staying forward. All right? We don't need to get full extension here at the end. Whatever's comfortable, whatever's natural. Okay? Again, you can weight this with a kettlebell or a dumbbell, and then go and increase that load for reps and before form starts to break down. Maintain a good full foot contact with the ground on this front foot. Heel, forefoot stays in contact the entire time. Don't let your weight go towards the outside or the inside of that foot. Go ahead, give that a shot. Okay, this is the lateral kettlebell swing or side kettlebell swing. What we're doing here is trying to emphasize one hip over the other, and we're going to make it so it's impossible not to get into this hip and really emphasize what would be internal rotation of getting this pelvis turning on top of this femur, and then using that big stretch we get in the side of the hip as a sensation to know what it feels like to actually use this hip to help gain mobility of internal rotation on this hip, and then how to use it, that internal mobility, under a loaded and an explosive scenario. Okay, so what we're going to do here is stagger our stance so that the hip we're focusing on is about half a foot width in front. So here my right foot would be about half a foot width in front of my left. From here, this back foot, whatever's most comfortable for you, we can start a little bit wider, or narrower would be a little bit more difficult. Find whatever's comfortable. We're going to try to keep this foot in the ground. It's okay if it comes up a little bit. From here, we're going to get in just a little bit of a hinged position. So we're already hinging back into this hip a little bit. We have a slight knee bend. And then here we have to play around and see what feels best. Here's the motion. To get activation, a big stretch, and a big feel of us using that hip, you'll feel it on the outside and in front of the hip, is how do we get that to feel it the most? So sometimes we'll have to go very little knee bend and push the hips back every time we come through and really focus on keeping a similar knee angle the whole time. And then other times when we get more explosive, where we get a little bit better at feeling that hip, we can get a little bit more knee drive. Okay, so give that a shot. Try it on both sides. Okay, for this exercise, what we need is a wall and a medicine ball. Fairly light on the medicine ball. What we want to do, I kind of focus on with this exercise, is getting our hips to stay back and to be able to push through and create power through those hips. So I'm going to have one foot up on the wall. I'll have my other foot in front. From here, the motion is a rotation towards that front side foot, and then back up towards away, and then through and down into the ground like that. I want you to always maintain pressure of this backside foot into that wall. From here, I want you to get explosive with this hip, but always keeping pressure in this wall. What that does is it allows us to create force and pressure into this hip without moving and extending forward. Okay, so you can imagine the golf swing. This is going to help prevent that early extension, or giving us a feel what it feels like to get into this hip, to create power through that hip without coming through over top of that hip. Okay, so it's helping us rotate and stay back through the pelvis, keeping the pelvis back, using this left glute to come back and take up that space. Okay, so again, it's here, pushing into that wall, here. So I can feel myself as I go to contract, really slam this ball into the ground with my left leg to do this, is that I'm also getting a little bit of contraction here to, again, help influence this stay back through here like that. Okay? You can do this on both sides. Go ahead, give it a shot.
Okay, so to wrap it up, I think you did a good job of kind of explaining how that process works. Again, might be hard for everyone to understand, but if you've gone through this process and we've started opening up some things and asked some things from that hip, a lot of times golfers are like, whoa, this is kind of difficult for me. I see that the mobility is there, but I'm struggling to use it or feel it. And then we do some of these drills, and it starts to click a little bit, and they're able to, and they say things like, man, I feel like I'm actually able to get into that hip a little bit more. I can feel the power coming from that hip. I can feel how I'm stopping these characteristics that we've been working on from happening by using strength stability and timing, right? We're just gaining a control over the motor, control the mechanics of the swing after we've gone through those earlier stages of mobility and strength. So again, this is kind of a small example of the process there. What I'd recommend is checking out some of the other articles that are somewhat similar. It's like last week's article, What Mobility is Needed for the Backswing. Another article, the lower quarter rotation test, that looks a lot at the hip, and then creating power in the golf swing, which is always just kind of about putting everything together. So an important couple articles there. Check those out. Otherwise, check out the blog and the other resources, and then reach out to me directly through the phone number or the email, or go right onto that website, and you can find ways to contact me there. And we can do an assessment, or we can learn more about what you need, and maybe get you in for a full assessment, and we can go from there. Again, thanks for listening. I will see you in the next one. Bye.